Welcome back to the open ground. Today's exploration: why physics fractures and events endure. A perpetualist dissolution of the problem of time. Meta-reflection: the persistence of the problem. The problem of time has haunted physics for more than a century. In relativity, time is elastic, bent by gravity and motion. In quantum mechanics, time is a fixed backdrop, a neutral parameter. In thermodynamics, time becomes an arrow, irreversible and absolute. These three visions cannot be reconciled, yet all persist. Most problems in science signal gaps of knowledge: missing data, incomplete equations, technical puzzles awaiting a clever solution. The problem of time is different. It resists solution, not because the pieces are absent, but because the very category itself is misframed. Time is not fundamental in the way we assume. Here we must be precise. Time functions as a construct, a mathematical framework for relating and measuring events. Constructs are indispensable tools, but their utility doesn't guarantee ontological priority. Consider electromagnetic fields, mathematically constructed, empirically verified. Yet we don't mistake Maxwell's equations for the underlying reality they describe. The equations map the territory. They are not the territory itself. The persistence of time's contradictions suggests something different is happening. Unlike electromagnetic fields, which achieve consistency across quantum and relativistic domains, time fractures. This fracture persists not despite our best efforts, but because of them. What is real is not time as construct, but the recursive event structure that makes temporal measurement possible. The dynamic pattern where occurrence, relation, and irreversibility constitute each other in ongoing process. Augustine anticipated this insight in his Confessions. What then is time? If no one asks me, I know. If I want to explain it to someone who asks, I do not know. His recognition that time resists definition while remaining experientially undeniable points toward the distinction between construct and ground. Augustine's psychological analysis revealed time as the soul's extension across memory, attention, and expectation, not as objective container, but as relational activity. This intuition anticipates the recursive understanding. Time emerges through the very process of consciousness engaging with change, not as independent framework within which change occurs. The objection: every field has open problems. Why privilege time? Yet this misses the structural difference. Other open problems in physics involve missing data or incomplete equations. The problem of time involves contradictory completeness. Each framework is internally consistent, yet mutually incompatible. The contradiction across physics pillars is not a flaw in calculation, but evidence that our fundamental category requires revision. Physics triadic fracture. Physics today rests on three great frameworks, each indispensable, each internally consistent, and yet each incompatible with the others when it comes to time. Relativity tells us that time is relational. It is not absolute, but woven into the fabric of space-time, elastic under gravity, stretched by velocity. The consequence is the block universe picture. All events, past, present, and future, equally real, frozen in four-dimensional geometry. Here time is spatialized, made into another dimension of an eternal manifold. Einstein himself recognized the radical implications. For us believing physicists, the distinction between past, present, and future is only a stubbornly persistent illusion. Quantum mechanics tells us something different. Here, time appears as a background parameter, a neutral axis along which probabilities evolve according to the Schrödinger equation. Unlike relativity, quantum time is not curved or elastic. It remains flat and absolute, more Newtonian than Einsteinian. Yet the moment of measurement, when superposition collapses into definite states, introduces a different temporal structure entirely. Suddenly, time is no longer smooth background, but punctured by discrete events that seem to defy the time-symmetric equations from which they emerge. Heisenberg noted this tension. The concept of the past and future cannot be applied to the particle. In the formalism of quantum theory, there is no description of what happens to the system between the initial observation and the next measurement. The quantum framework thus contains an internal temporal contradiction, continuous evolution, punctured by discontinuous events that resist integration into the mathematical formalism. Thermodynamics offers a third vision. Time here is an arrow. Entropy increases, systems decay, heat disperses. Unlike relativity's symmetry, or quantum's background neutrality, thermodynamics insists on directional irreversibility. The future is not the past, and what has been cannot return. This arrow emerges statistically from the behavior of large numbers of particles, yet it cannot be reduced back to the time-symmetric laws from which it emerges. Boltzmann captured this paradox. The second law will be explained mechanically by means of the assumption that the universe started from a very improbable state. But this explanation requires temporal direction to explain temporal direction. It presupposes what it seeks to derive. Taken separately, each framework is coherent and empirically successful. Together, they cannot be reconciled. Relativity's block universe contradicts thermodynamics' arrow. If all moments exist equally, why should entropy increase? Quantum mechanics' external time contradicts relativity's dynamic spacetime. How can time be both background parameter and curved manifold? Thermodynamics' statistical irreversibility sits uneasily with quantum cosmology's time-symmetric equations. This is not complementarity in Bohr's sense. Complementarity implies that different descriptions converge on the same underlying reality from different perspectives. These do not converge, they collapse against one another. Their contradictions are not accidents waiting for resolution, but structural features that persist despite enormous theoretical effort. What follows is the triadic fracture: relation, relativity. Time as geometric dimension woven into spacetime. Possibility, quantum. Time as background for the evolution and collapse of probability. Irreversibility, thermodynamics. Time as directional flow from past to future. Each grasps something essential that the others cannot absorb without contradiction. Their incompatibility is not failure, but evidence. If time were truly fundamental, physics should converge on a consistent account. That it fractures instead suggests that time itself is the wrong category, a useful construct stretched beyond its limits. The recursive event structure is ground. If time fractures under scrutiny, what stands in its place? What remains when the construct is recognized as construct? The answer is not another theory of time, but the recursive event structure that makes temporal constructs possible. Every framework in physics, relativity, quantum mechanics, thermodynamics, presupposes the occurrence of events. Measurements happen. Interactions take place. Systems evolve from one state to another. These events are not abstractions or mathematical conveniences. They are the irreducible recursive processes that make physics possible. Without events, there would be nothing to measure, no interactions to describe, no states to evolve. But what exactly is this event structure? Here we must move beyond the language of discrete moments to recognize events as inherently recursive processes. An event is not a point in time, but a dynamic pattern where three aspects continuously constitute each other. Singularity. Each event actualizes one configuration from multiple possibilities, making specific what was previously indefinite. This is not mere temporal uniqueness, but ontological determination. the collapse of superposed potential into definite actuality. Relationality. No event occurs in isolation, but always emerges from and contributes to a broader relational matrix. Events are always already positioned within fields of interaction that determine their possible connections to other events. Irrevocability. What has occurred cannot be undone. The event leaves an irreversible transformation in the structure of what is. This is not merely thermodynamic irreversibility, but ontological consequence. The recursive process adds something genuinely new to reality's structure. These three characteristics are not separate features, but aspects of a unified recursive process. Each event simultaneously actualizes possibility, singularity, emerges from relational positioning, relationality, and creates irreversible transformation, irrevocability. They cannot be separated without destroying what makes an event an event. Whitehead recognized this recursive structure in his process philosophy. An actual entity is at once the subject experiencing and the superject of its experiences. Each actual occasion emerges through what he called prehensions, the process by which every entity incorporates aspects of all others in its self-creation. Whitehead's insight was that events are not things that happen in time, but temporal patterns through which reality continuously recreates itself. Similarly, Bergson distinguished between measured time, temps, and lived duration, durée, arguing that real time is qualitative becoming rather than quantitative measurement. In Creative Evolution, he wrote, "For a conscious being, to exist is to change. To change is to mature. To mature is to go on creating oneself endlessly." Bergson's duration captures the recursive nature of temporal becoming. Each moment emerges from and transforms the whole of which it is part. This recursive event structure provides the stable ground that temporal constructs attempt to measure and coordinate. Events occur as singular actualization of possibility within relational fields that preserve irreversible traces of what has occurred. Time is our framework for measuring and coordinating events, but it is not the ground in which events occur. The ground is the recursive event structure itself, the ongoing process through which reality continuously becomes. Recursion as universal structure. The fracture of physics does not mean failure. It reveals recursion operating as the fundamental structure of reality across all scales. Each of the three great frameworks is not a rival to the others, but a necessary perspective on the same recursive ground, the event structure of reality, seen through a different lens. This recursive pattern operates identically across scales because it reflects the fundamental way reality organizes itself. From quantum measurement to cosmic evolution, the same three-aspect structure repeats: actualization of possibility within relational context, generating irreversible consequences. Quantum mechanics exposes the recursive event as actualization of possibility. Before measurement, quantum systems exist in superposition, multiple potential outcomes suspended in mathematical possibility. Measurement is the crystallization of one outcome from many. Possibility becomes actuality through the recursive interaction between observed system, measuring apparatus, and environmental context. The framework treats time as external parameter, precisely because it focuses on the anterior moment of possibility, before a temporal sequence emerges. What quantum mechanics reveals is that events arise from an open field of potential that cannot be captured in determinate temporal categories. Heisenberg's uncertainty principle reveals the recursive structure at the quantum level. What we observe is not nature itself, but nature exposed to our method of questioning. The observer, observed, and medium of observation continuously transform each other in recursive loops that make objective measurement impossible while making relative measurement possible. Relativity exposes the recursive event as geometric relation. Events do not exist as isolated points, but as relational nodes within the manifold of spacetime. The curvature of spacetime around massive objects shows that events are always already situated within a field that determines their possible connections to other events. Space and time are unified because events are inherently relational. They exist only in their geometric positioning relative to other events. What relativity reveals is that events are never self-contained, but always embedded in a broader relational structure. Einstein's insight that matter tells spacetime how to curve, and curved spacetime tells matter how to move, exemplifies the recursive relationship. The relational field shapes events while events reshape the relational field. This reciprocal determination operates continuously, preventing any separation between events and their relational context. Thermodynamics exposes the recursive event as irreversible transformation. Each microscopic event, particle collision, energy transfer, state transition, leaves an irreversible trace in the structure of the whole. These traces accumulate into macroscopic irreversibility. Entropy increases, information is lost, complexity emerges and decays. What thermodynamics reveals is that events are not mere rearrangements of eternal components, but genuine occurrences that add something irreducibly new to the structure of reality. The second law of thermodynamics describes this irreversible accumulation without explaining it. The explanation lies in recognizing that every event, however small, participates in the recursive transformation of the whole. Prigoghine's work on dissipative structures showed how irreversible processes can generate complex organization rather than mere decay, revealing the creative aspect of irreversibility. Actualization, relation, irreversibility. These are not sequential aspects, but simultaneous dimensions of every recursive event. Each physics framework grasps one dimension while necessarily backgrounding the others. Each achieves consistency by treating its particular dimension as fundamental, but this very consistency prevents integration with the others. This is why unification fails and must fail. The frameworks are not incomplete descriptions of time waiting to be combined. They are complete descriptions of different aspects of recursive event structure that cannot be reduced to a single temporal framework without losing what makes each distinctive. The recursion is this: each framework reveals the event structure while concealing the others. Each is necessary but insufficient. Each points beyond itself to what it cannot contain. Together they form not a synthesis but a structured incompleteness that preserves what each uniquely discloses. Heidegger anticipated this insight in his analysis of temporality in Being and Time. He distinguished between ordinary time, succession of now points, and primordial temporality, the unified structure of having been, coming toward, and making present. For Heidegger, authentic temporality is not a container within which events occur, but the recursive structure through which being discloses itself. Temporality is the primordial, outside of itself, in and for itself. This ecstatic structure, where past, present, and future constitute each other recursively, parallels the three-aspect event structure that physics frameworks approach from different angles. Contradictions as confirmation. In most scientific contexts, contradiction signals error, competing theories that must be reconciled, unified, or replaced. The contradiction of time across physics frameworks is different. Here, contradiction is not obstacle, but evidence. It confirms that what we call time is a construct that fractures when pressed beyond its limits of applicability. Consider the contradiction between relativity's block universe and thermodynamics' arrow. The block universe implies that all events, past, present, future, exist simultaneously in four-dimensional spacetime. There is no objective now and no fundamental distinction between past and future. Yet thermodynamics insists that entropy increases directionally, that heat flows from hot to cold, that the future is fundamentally different from the past. Both descriptions are empirically successful within their domains, yet they cannot both be fundamentally true. McTaggart's famous argument about the unreality of time revealed this contradiction a century ago. He showed that temporal descriptions involve either a circular reliance on temporal concepts, A series, past, present, future, or fail to capture temporal passage, B series, earlier than, later than. McTaggart concluded that time is unreal. The perpetualist insight extends this. The contradiction reveals not time's unreality, but its status as construct rather than ground. Standard approaches treat this as a puzzle awaiting solution. Perhaps the block universe is correct and the arrow of time is emergent or illusory. Perhaps temporal becoming is real and the block universe is merely a useful fiction. Perhaps both are partial truths awaiting synthesis in a more complete theory. But over a century of effort has failed to produce any such resolution. The persistence of contradiction suggests a different interpretation. The contradiction confirms that time is not the right category for fundamental physics. Time is a construct that works within limits but fractures when those limits are exceeded. The contradiction is not a flaw to be corrected, but a boundary marker showing where the construct reaches its breaking point. This becomes clearer when we consider quantum mechanics' contribution to the fracture. The Schrödinger equation evolves quantum states in smooth, continuous, time-reversible fashion until the moment of measurement, when discontinuous, irreversible collapse occurs. Time is both smooth during evolution and punctured during measurement. This cannot be resolved by more precise equations or better interpretations. The contradiction is built into the structure of quantum mechanics itself. Von Neumann recognized this in his analysis of the measurement problem. The formalism requires two incompatible types of temporal evolution: unitary evolution for closed systems and collapse for measurement interactions. This dual temporality cannot be unified without destroying the empirical success of quantum mechanics. What does not contradict is the recursive event structure underlying these constructs. Events occur through actualization within relational context, generating irreversible consequences without contradiction. The contradiction emerges only when we attempt to reduce this three-aspect recursive structure to a single temporal framework. Each reduction captures something essential while losing something else essential. The contradictions of time across physics are not bugs, but features. They are the clearest evidence we have that time is construct, not ground. What endures through the contradiction is the recursive event structure that makes physics possible. What fractures is our conceptual framework for grasping that structure. Derrida's deconstruction anticipated this insight through his analysis of temporal difference, the way meaning emerges through deferral and difference rather than present identity. For Derrida, the present moment is always already constituted by its relations to what is absent, past and future, preventing any simple temporal foundation. This recursive constitution of temporality through its own differences parallels the way event structure emerges through the recursive interaction of its three aspects. Scale invariant recursion. The recursive event structure operates identically across all scales of reality, from quantum interactions to cosmic evolution. This scale invariance provides further evidence that we are dealing with a fundamental pattern rather than a limited philosophical framework. At the quantum scale, measurement events exhibit the three-aspect structure clearly. Each measurement actualizes one outcome from superposed possibilities. Singularity emerges through interaction between system apparatus, and environment, relationality, and creates irreversible entanglement that cannot be undone, irrevocability. The collapse of the wave function is not a temporal process, but a recursive transformation, where possibility becomes actuality through relational interaction. At the biological scale, living systems embody recursive event structure through their continuous exchange with environment. Each organism actualizes specific biological possibilities, singularity, through ongoing interaction with its ecological context, the relationality, while contributing irreversibly to evolutionary processes, irrevocability. Life is the recursive event structure, extended across time through self-organization and reproduction. At the psychological scale, consciousness operates as continuous recursive event structure. Each moment of awareness actualizes specific conscious content, singularity, through the interaction between attention, experience, and cognitive framework, relationality, while contributing irreversibly to memory and development, irrevocability. What we call the stream of consciousness is actually a sequence of discrete recursive events that create the appearance of continuity. William James captured this in his analysis of the specious present. In short, the practically cognized present is no knife edge, but a saddleback with a certain breadth of its own on which we sit perched and from which we look in two directions into time. James recognized that conscious experience involves recursive temporal synthesis rather than simple temporal flow. At the social scale, cultural events exhibit the same recursive structure. Historical events actualize specific social possibilities, singularity, through the interaction of individual actions, institutional structures, and cultural context, relationality, while creating irreversible transformations in social reality, irrevocability. History is not a temporal sequence, but a recursive process where each event emerges from and transforms the social matrix. At the cosmic scale, the universe itself exhibits recursive event structure through the continuous interaction between local processes and universal laws. Each cosmic event actualizes specific physical possibilities, singularity, through gravitational and electromagnetic interactions, relationality, while contributing irreversibly to cosmic evolution, irrevocability. The universe is not unfolding in time, but recursively creating itself through ongoing event structure. This scale invariance reveals why temporal unification fails. Each scale manifests the same recursive structure through different mediums, creating the appearance of different temporal regimes while sharing the same underlying pattern. The frameworks fracture because they attempt to reduce this multi-scale recursive structure to single temporal categories. Spinoza anticipated this insight in his Ethics through the concept of conatus, the effort by which every being strives to persevere in existence. For Spinoza, this striving operates identically across all levels of reality, from simple bodies to complex individuals to the universe as a whole. Each entity actualizes its possibilities through interaction with others while contributing to the larger reality of which it is part. This recursive self-maintenance and transformation operates across all scales without requiring temporal foundation. The Perpetualist Dissolution. If physics fractures, and the fracture is confirmation rather than failure, what follows? The temptation is to seek new unification, a more fundamental theory that finally reconciles relativity, quantum mechanics, and thermodynamics. But the lesson of time suggests that such unification is impossible because it mistakes the nature of the problem. What is fundamental is not time, but the recursive event structure of reality. Events occur as recursive patterns where actualization, relation, and irreversibility constitute each other in ongoing process. Time is a construct, a mathematical framework for measuring and coordinating events that becomes indispensable for physics but must not be mistaken for the reality it helps us navigate. The three pillars of physics each capture one essential dimension of recursive event structure. Quantum mechanics reveals actualization, how events emerge through the recursive interaction between system, measurement apparatus, and environmental context, collapsing possibility into actuality. Relativity reveals relation, how events are positioned within geometric manifolds where each event's actuality shapes and is shaped by the relational field of spacetime. Thermodynamics reveals irreversibility, how events leave irreversible traces in the structure of reality, accumulating into macroscopic transformations that cannot be undone. Together they form a recursive structure where each framework points beyond itself to what it cannot contain. Their incompatibility is not error, but necessity. Each must exclude the others to achieve its particular disclosure, yet each requires the others to complete the picture. This suggests a different approach to fundamental physics. Instead of seeking temporal unification, we should develop what we might call a recursive, event-structural approach that preserves the essential insights of each framework while acknowledging their necessary incompleteness. Such an approach would treat time as useful construct while locating fundamentality in the recursive event structure that makes temporal measurement possible. This does not mean abandoning physics' existing frameworks. Relativity, quantum mechanics, and thermodynamics remain empirically successful and conceptually indispensable, but it does mean recognizing their proper scope. They are perspectives on recursive event structure, not complete descriptions of temporal reality. The practical implications are subtle but significant. Instead of seeking theories that reduce events to temporal processes, we might develop theories that show how temporal processes emerge from recursive event structure. Instead of treating time as the fundamental parameter in which events occur, we might treat events as the fundamental recursive processes that make temporal measurement possible. Consider how this reframes the measurement problem in quantum mechanics. Instead of asking how measurement produces definite outcomes in time, we ask how the recursive interaction between system, apparatus, and environment actualizes specific possibilities through relational positioning while creating irreversible entanglement. The temporal aspect becomes secondary to the recursive event structure that makes measurement possible. Similarly, this reframes the problem of reconciling quantum mechanics with general relativity. Instead of seeking a unified spacetime framework, we recognize that both theories describe different aspects of how recursive event structure manifests across different scales and contexts. The incompatibility indicates the richness of recursive event structure, rather than theoretical inadequacy. Leibniz anticipated this approach in his relational theory of space and time. For Leibniz, space and time are not containers, but relations between monads, simple substances that continuously perceive and appetize in patterns of harmonious development. Each monad actualizes its internal possibilities through its relations to all others while contributing to the universal harmony. This recursive constitution of reality through relational actualization parallels the event structural approach while avoiding the temporal substantialism that creates physics contradictions. This is the Perpetualist resolution. Recursive events are fundamental. Time is construct. Events occur as ongoing recursive processes where actualization, relation, and irreversibility constitute each other continuously. Time is how we measure, coordinate, and narrate these recursive processes, but it is not the ground in which they occur. The ground is the recursive event structure itself, the ongoing pattern through which reality continuously becomes. A momentary pause. What then remains, if not time, as fundamental? Not a new law, not a final equation, not a solved riddle. What remains is the recognition that recursive events occur, that reality continuously actualizes possibilities through relational interaction, while creating irreversible transformations that cannot be reduced to the frameworks we use to describe them. This recognition does not solve the problem of time, it dissolves it. The problem persists only as long as we seek temporal unification where none is possible. Once we recognize that recursive events are fundamental and time is construct, the problem transforms. Instead of asking how to unify different accounts of time, we ask how different aspects of recursive event structure give rise to different temporal constructs. The physicist may continue to use relativity, quantum mechanics, and thermodynamics. The philosopher may continue to analyze temporal experience. Both remain necessary, but neither should claim fundamentality for its particular temporal framework. Time is scaffolding, indispensable but not ground. What perpetualism insists is only this: do not mistake the construct for the ground. Do not confuse what fractures under pressure for what endures through it. The persistence of contradiction is not failure. It is instruction. It teaches us to look beyond temporal frameworks to the recursive event structure that makes them possible. Recursive events occur. Time measures. The first is fundamental, the second construct. This distinction does not solve all problems, but it dissolves the particular problem that has haunted physics for over a century. Time fractures because it is construct. Recursive events endure because they are the ongoing ground of becoming itself. Augustine's insight proves prophetic. Time remains mysterious because we seek to explain the construct rather than recognize the recursive ground from which all explanation emerges. The mystery dissolves when we stop asking what time is and start recognizing how recursive events make temporal measurement possible. For minds ready to distinguish scaffolding from foundation, the recursive event structure reveals itself as the persistent ground that underlies all temporal appearance while never appearing as temporal itself. In this recognition, the problem of time finds not solution but dissolution, the most elegant resolution philosophy can provide. Tell me your thoughts in the comments. For the minds that are ready, until next time.